In today's video, we're going to cover the hip slide, what it should do in the backswing, if it's okay, and then of course what it looks like, what it should do in the downswing and the impact, because if you do it correctly, it will transform how you're able to hit the golf ball. If you do it incorrectly, it'll destroy how you hit the golf ball. So we're going to cover what the hips should be doing. We're not going to talk about turning or anything like that too much today, but it's all about the lateral hip slide, left and right. If you're brand new to our channel, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell button. You'll see our future videos that we have posting. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoy the content today, and thanks for tuning in. So to start off, we're going to talk about hip slide in the backswing. Okay, hips don't typically slide in the backswing. That's the first thing that you should know. So you will see pros, they tend to start off with about 45% or 55% of their weight on their left foot and 45% on their right foot. And so if you see any movement like a slide to the right, it's because they're actually pushing their pressure to the right foot a little bit. So their hip slides maybe half an inch. That's it. It starts to slide and then it turns. Okay? So if you need to know what it feels like, basically, if you just act like you're punching somebody on the right, to the right of you, right? It's that way. So they're going to push off, and then they're going to have that hip movement in their golf swing. They don't slide to the right. They don't move their entire pressure and their entire body over to the right, which a lot of us do. We tend to really move to the right. So what you need to kind of focus on is making sure that that hip, it's okay if it moves a little bit. It can't move a lot. What a lot of us tend to get into is we keep our head really steady, we slide our hips, and that famous reverse spine tangle, which is the disaster of every golf swing. You will never be consistent with that motion. So make sure you're not doing that. So don't try to move all your weight and have that hip kick out to the right, because then you're going to have a big dilemma on trying to improve your golf swing. Now we're going to talk about hip motion, hip lateral motion on the downswing, because it does some really cool things. So if you are somebody who really struggles with getting steep with the golf swing, it could be that your hips are just turning really too fast. So automatically, one thing that a little hip bump can do, or a lateral motion with your body, is when you're coming down, if your hips laterally go that way, you'll notice it becomes very hard for you to dump that club over the top. It slows down your hips a little bit, allows you to shallow it. Okay, if you watched Rory in the U.S. Open this past week, he tends to have maybe a little bit more of that lateral motion than a lot of people, but he also likes to play a draw, so it works out to his advantage. All right. Another thing that the lateral hip slide does is we like to see joints line up. Okay, so when you get to the top, a lot of people tend to hang back, right? And what impact should look like is you should have ankle, hip, and shoulder pretty much line up at impact. Okay, well, and with the driver, it's still going to be here, but the body's going to be a little bit more leaned back. That cannot happen if your hips stay here and just turn out of the way. Okay, so we like to see that motion of where everything stacks up and is on top of itself. Now, this is what becomes hard for most people right here, is that feeling. Because most people, when it comes to sliding their hips, they move everything. All right? So before you try to incorporate a lateral motion, you need to be able to basically keep your head in the same spot and then just shift to the left. If you can't do that, if it's really hard for you, then incorporating a lateral motion like that, it's going to be very hard. It's still going to be rough on your golf swing. So until you can just feel yourself slide to the left without your head going with it, I wouldn't incorporate it. Don't put it into your golf swing until you're ready. Now, the other cool thing when you have that little lateral motion with your swing, so a lot of people are like, when should I start doing that? When the club gets back down to about right here. Then it's going to start moving left. All right? And again, head has to feel like it stays still. So for most people, if you're doing this, if you're practicing this, when it starts to slide, in the beginning, your head's going to feel like it is so far back because you are not used to moving that way. All right? But if you kind of watch my swing, my head feels really far back, but it actually just hasn't moved. It's just that my body has moved that way. And for me, personally, I feel like this hip is so far past, but I know when I actually look at it, it's stacked on top, even though it doesn't feel that way to me. It feels like it's at least 5 or 6 inches beyond out there. Okay? You can also kind of check your width of your stance, because it's really easy to get out of alignment if your stance is too narrow. It's too wide. It's extraordinarily hard to get the joints to line up. So make sure that your stance width also is correct when it comes to all this. So that lateral motion, maybe just a little bit in the beginning. If you've seen, I think his name's Kyle Berkshire, something like that, long drive guy, you'll see he actually kind of does this with his feet to get his pressure moving. All right, he doesn't slide out there. All right, and so you'll see, if you see a pro move a little bit off the line, that's kind of why, because they're just moving pressure, they're not moving their whole body. Clumb comes back to about here, and we start to slide. All right, joints line up. All right, some cool things start to happen at this point. This right hip gets lower. All right, that's a draw move or a shallowing move. If the hip stays high, that's a steepening move. All right. Other thing that starts to happen, all right, you'll see that your legs start to come into this angle, and this knee starts to actually bank. All right. So if you're somebody who's kind of stuck squishing the bug like you're in baseball, you probably don't have a whole lot of hip lateral motion in there. All right, so we get to the top, kind of slides, this starts to bank, and then everything's stacked on top. And when it stacks, it's much easier for your internal hip rotation to help you. All right, when you hang back, it's kind of weird. Okay, if you don't know what internal hip rotation, it's basically ability to turn into that joint. And that's why a lot of us have that front foot flared out open a little bit, because we're a little stiff in that area. Okay, so right here it starts to slide. Everything starts to bank, and the knees actually will start to straighten a little bit. And then you come into it, and you'll have a lot of that good impact stuff starting to happen. You might be afraid that you hit behind it for a little while because your head feels like it's so far back, but it isn't. All right, just be careful that everything doesn't go with it. It's kind of the idea of trying to cover the golf ball. If you try to cover the golf ball, you're going to hit a lot of stuff low and left with this. All right, so if you want to be somebody who starts to pound it out there like Rory, get those high, nice draws, you need to start feeling, all right, that bank, that right hip low, right, and you're going to feel like your head's behind it. Club's going to feel like it's kind of traveling a little bit more out to the right when you do that. If you really cover it and your hips don't slide a lot, your exit will be down here. If you slide a little bit more, your exit will start to be out a little bit more to your right to hit those draws. All right, so you can incorporate that any way you want to. If you're somebody who's too shallow, maybe you should check and make sure that you're not getting out of alignment. And if you're somebody who's steep, you might need to try to feel like you can get into that alignment. You're not hanging back here. All right, thanks for watching today. Hope these lateral moves make sense to you. If they don't, leave a comment down below, and I can always make a video to kind of clean it up a little bit. But if you can incorporate how to laterally move into impact and do it right, things will definitely start going better. Your ball striking will increase, and your consistency.